Welcome back. You're watching NewsX. I am Rishabh Gulati. All through my youth, we were being told that in a globalized world that is soon to turn flat, quote unquote, we are getting closer and closer together, which is true in many respects. You are watching this broadcast on a screen, you can watch it anywhere in the world, real time, live. But the physicality of this planet is something we cannot disclude. There are vast distances in just time and space that still have to be traversed to go from one part of the world to the other. And in a world where the complexities of major power dynamics are yet to be completed, we have to now review what the snapshot of how things stood for the past 100 years continue into the next 100. As the British Empire was dissolving, Britain retained for itself what it called not only the Dominion Commonwealth countries, which is where the king is still the head of state, Australia, Canada, but also overseas territories and island bases. The UK has 145 of them across 45 countries. The Americans have 750 overseas bases across 80 countries. Compare that to India and China, which have maybe one or two. Some of these are legacy matters preceding the Second World War, some of them continuing since then. Now, this brings us to the subject of the map on your screens, the Chagos Islands in Mauritius. Who do they belong to? It's a simple question with a highly complex answer. Let's pick up this conversation. Professor Madam Nalapa joining us on the broadcast, Ambassador Basavati Mukherjee is with us, Hindol Sen Gupta joining us, and Patikrit joining us shortly as well. Ambassador Mukherjee, you know Mauritius better than the rest of us. So, can you help our viewers understand what is the issue here that we are now discussing in the run-up to the Prime Minister's visit to that island nation?
This has been a thorn in the Mauritius-UK bilateral relationship ever since Mauritius gained independence. Let us not also forget that 51% of the population of Mauritius is of Indian origin. When the Brits decided that they would go, but they would leave part of their colonial heritage behind, in India's case, it was loot and plunder, our precious artifacts, parts of our history, and leaving us with a colonial mindset that we are inferior to the colonizer. In the case of Mauritius, which is a much smaller place, first they brought in the indentured, treated them like slaves, and much later, when they were obliged to hand over independence, they made sure that they would retain sovereignty over an integral part of Mauritius, which is the Chagos Islands. And now when they are returning it, with the negotiations with the previous government, they still want to retain control for a 101-year lease over their military base on the Indian Ocean, and that is not acceptable to the new Mauritian Prime Minister Naveen Ramgoolam, whose father actually founded the nation, and they are renegotiating the terms. The insistence of UK, which is right now a substandard middle level power, GDP far less than India, to stick to its colonial outposts in the Indian Ocean, etc., is quite ridiculous, considering that right now, if the Americans withdraw military protection from Europe, no European country at present and post-Brexit United Kingdom is capable of defending itself fully. So under those circumstances, for Britain to harbor these colonial notions that they still are master of the sea and they are still master over their ex-colonies is very unfortunate, and they need to rethink their position. Chagos should have been returned to Mauritius along with their independence, which they did not do. And now, as we can see, they are still trying to hold on to the military base.
Okay. All right.
So I think that they will be obliged to hand it over, Rishabh. But it is going to be a very interesting visit because PM will be there. PM has fully supported the Mauritian position. So let's see what happens.
Okay.
Rishabh.
So, ladies and gentlemen, it boils down to Diego Garcia. Okay, is the largest of the British Indian Ocean bases. It's also used by the Americans. The population that was living in the Chagos Islands has already been expelled 40-50 years ago. It's about the military base in Diego Garcia, and can the UK in an agreement get another 99-year lease for it or not? In principle, the answer is absolutely not, and India has taken the in principle stand. In practice of global dynamics, it's much more complicated. Let me get Madhav Nalapath into that. Professor Nalapath, now in principle, I can understand the argument that India would not want a former colonial power to still have colonial possessions in this part of the world. But in practice, why would we have a problem with the Americans and the British having a presence in the Indian Ocean?
Well, Rishabh, as Ambassador Mukherjee correctly said, clearly the government of Mauritius has a claim to Chagos Islands. Of course, that claim is disputed by Britain, and they basically say that the population of Chagos had nothing to do with Mauritius. Now, I'm not sure if that's a fact, but the population did migrate, and relatively few of them went to Mauritius. Most of them went to the UK or to the US or to countries like that. But having said that, India is a champion of the global south. Mauritius is very much a part of the global south, and therefore there's no question that we have to support the stand of Mauritius on sovereignty. Where it gets a bit tricky, Rishabh, I have friends who know Defense Secretary Hegseth very well of the US, and they are very clear that the Defense Department, at least under President Trump, will not surrender control of that base in the Chagos Islands. You will remember that Donald Trump talked about reclaiming Bagram. I don't think that's an ideal threat, for a simple reason that it is not surrendering Bagram to the Taliban. In effect, it's made it a Chinese base. So the fear is that a government in Mauritius comes, another government goes. Now the Solomon Islands, for example, a government came that basically became very pro-China and turned away from the United States. The worry in Washington and London is that the same can happen where Mauritius is concerned. I think that's where India has taken a very correct and nuanced position. India is hoping that there will be a mutually satisfactory conclusion to the talks that are going on.
All right.
Because, quite frankly, the US is very clear. They are not going to leave that base come what may. And under President Trump, they are very firm on that. I'm not sure any other succeeding president will be as firm for simple reason, Rishabh. Today, we are having a situation of confrontation with China. And the worry is that tomorrow some other government comes and that base is given to China by that government as Bagram has in effect been given. That would be a grave security threat and not just United States.
Okay, so in principle arguments. So in practicality, ladies and gentlemen, as the crow flies, these island archipelago, its northernmost extent is closer to Maldives than it is to Mauritius. But it was governed under the territory of Mauritius as far as historical records go. Okay. Now, in principle, arguments do matter. For example, when India gained independence in 1947, several parts and territories in the eastern seaboard, including what is the United Arab Emirates, many of them were controlled by the British Indian government. We took an in principle decision that we cannot be supervising administrative control over territories outside our land borders after having removed a colonial power. So we in principle said the local have to be empowered. Now, Hindol Singh Gupta, that is the conundrum, and we have taken the in principle argument. But let's look at the whole concept of power projection by great powers and military bases. I've told you the Americans are still sitting in Okinawa, they have 750 bases. The Chinese are trying to build more. I am assuming we are also trying to build more. So, how do we as a global community address the problem of sovereignty while at the same time allow for the existence of such kind of power projection?
I think two or three things must be mentioned here. I'll take off from what Professor Nalapat was saying. Remember, the base in Diego Garcia is one of the few places in the world where you can actually load Tomahawk missiles and such missiles onto submarines. There are very few bases around the world where this kind of work on submarines can be done. Also remember when after 9/11, when American B-2 bombers flew to Afghanistan, their refueling happened at Diego Garcia. So it's very important for the Americans that they retain these facilities, especially with China's advancing bases. Now, one of the ways we could find a middle path. Look, India cannot back down from the sovereignty question, because please remember, this question of bases was also something Sheikh Hasina mentioned in Bangladesh and in the northeastern territories of India, that the US is trying to carve out a special, land base, as it were, in some shape or form, to build another base there to counter China. So sovereignty is a primary principle that India cannot back out from. But allow me to give a sort of middle path solution. Perhaps, and of course I don't know the answer, none of us know the answer. Perhaps there could be some solution where the islands are returned, in a sense, to Mauritius, but it is operated by India with the Mauritius government under the, under the umbrella of American supervision. This could be a middle path solution. The modalities, of course, we don't know, but India cannot back out. And I completely agree with Professor Nalapat. The US is not going to give up this base very easily. There are very few bases in the world which is as critical as this one, and this is not going very easily. In fact, the real roadblock today is not the UK, but the US. But perhaps India could, find a middle path solution and in some roundabout way, exercise some kind of control over the future of these bases, which will, in a sense, allay American fears and not give these bases up, perhaps in the future, by a future government to the Chinese.
Okay, so what we are looking for is not only an in principle position, but an equitable solution. So, in principle, it should be the sovereign territory of Mauritius. For us to believe that 500 years ago, some Portuguese landed in an uninhabited island in the middle of the Indian Ocean, and therefore forever it shall be European, is a fallacious argument. But at the same time, we have to look at the pragmatics of it. So, now let me put a different proposition to Mr. Bansal, if I can. Alokji, let's take the example of Hong Kong, 1997, okay. The clarinets playing, and Charles was there, and they exited from Hong Kong. Different situation. Hong Kong is a city, it's an economic center, it has a large population, it's a large urban population. There is a constitutional setup because British laws are applicable for the residents there, and they have to be reintegrated into China, and a special mechanism had to be worked out. In this case, the conversation is completely different because it's about a base. It is largely uninhabited, all these areas. Diego Garcia for sure is uninhabited. But this is then a question not of the pragmatics of what will happen of the people living there, but about the practicality of equity. How do we distinguish between the two, sir?
See, firstly, this argument that this is uninhabited is actually flawed. There were people living when Britain vacated these islands.
Yeah.
They were forcibly removed. Please remember, they did not migrate. If anybody says they migrate, this is wrong. They were forcibly removed. This was being governed along with Mauritius in a singular administrative entity. When Britishers granted independence to Mauritius, they actually separated it. So this was actually nothing but a colonial conspiracy to deprive Mauritius of this rightful territory. Secondly, the administrative control still rests with Britishers. Diego Garcia is the largest of the Chagos archipelago islets, and it was also inhabited before actually they were forcibly evicted. Now the second point is, what should happen? Please remember, in 70s, India advocated Indian Ocean as a zone of peace. Now a time has come for India to again highlight the issue that no external power should be in Indian Ocean. Let this island return back to Mauritius and we can negotiate with them and take over and provide employment to the people and use the facilities rather than from getting them spoiled. I think in current scenario, it is best for India that all external powers exit Indian Ocean, and India as the largest littoral power actually maintains law and order in Indian Ocean. Most countries of the Indian Ocean region consider India as a benign power and look to us to provide them security in case of crisis, be it natural disasters or be it man-made disasters. We have actually provided succor not only to India but also to other countries whenever there has been a crisis in Indian Ocean region.
Okay.
So I think to maintain tranquility, Indian Ocean as a zone of peace should be propagated and we should support Mauritius' cause. US will take time to vacate, but eventually it will vacate because the cost, and President Trump looks at it purely from economic angle, is enormous as far as maintaining the.
All right. So I'll be practical here and I'll boil it down. Okay. You are in principle in support of the Mauritians having sovereignty over this island chain, dismissing all the nonsense of colonial era history that nothing was there and we built everything in the world and all the habitation and civilization came thanks to us. Dismiss that. But at the same time, you don't necessarily want the Americans and Britishers to pack up and leave tomorrow. So now let me go back to Ambassador Mukherjee. Ambassador Mukherjee, I mentioned Hong Kong, completely different scenario. Nasser and the nationalization of the Suez Canal. This is our sovereign territory. You can use it as long as you pay us the custom duties. So we've seen these complications in other parts of the world as well. So if in principle this is Mauritian sovereignty, can it be sensible for some logical, equitable deal to be figured out on lease, on rent or something? Is that possible, or would that also be untenable to the Mauritians?
First of all, Rishabh, the Mauritians have deep resentment towards the Brits because of the way they were treated. It was an uninhabited island when not the Portuguese but the Dutch came. It was inhabited by a large bird that could not fly called the dodo. They killed all the dodos and the only existing one is in the National Museum in Mauritius. When you go there, do have a look. The point is, it has a very painful history. It was first peopled by slaves who committed suicide by jumping into the ocean towards Africa. South Africa is their closest neighbor. They used to jump towards Mozambique and Madagascar. And then peopled by the Girmitiers who have written about the indentured labor. For the Mauritians, sovereignty over Chagos and Diego Garcia goes far beyond what they think or don't think of President Trump. It is not possible. President Trump is on a 4-year term. He cannot run again, right? So the point is that I think people are unaware that the Indian Navy, and I'm sure Captain Alok Bansal is an expert on this matter, the Indian Navy has for long policed the territorial waters of Mauritius with full approval of the Mauritian government. We also have military strategists and strategists from Government of India advising Mauritius on an informal basis based in Mauritius. We also have an organization called the IOC, which is the secretariat, like for the indentured, is based in Mauritius. I think the best solution is that first the Brits hand over complete sovereignty on Chagos to the Mauritians, and then let Mauritius negotiate a deal with the US, with India as the major power, as Captain Bansal says, because we would be doing what we are already doing. We have policed the waters of Mauritius and given security to Mauritius without the use of the military base in Diego Garcia.
Okay.
Because the Mauritians wanted to balance out their security because of their deep concerns over Diego Garcia. And Diego Garcia, Captain Bansal is absolutely right. It was forcibly taken over, exactly as what happened in the Straits of Gibraltar. So this is typical ex-colonial politics. I think that we should try and help them to negotiate an agreement, trilateral agreement between Mauritius, India and the United States.
Okay.
not with the.
Yeah, for
And
people
that's
for
going to-
yeah, for
that's
people
the-
watching the broadcast, believe it or not, since ambassadors mentioned it, the Rock of Gibraltar is still half under British control. They still run it, and that's in the Mediterranean. Okay, so let me get Professor Nalapat back into this conversation. Professor Nalapat, I told you there is a in principle argument which I don't think anybody disputes here, that it should be Mauritian sovereignty over their soil, and no claims of colonial era should be able to interrupt that. But at the same time, sir, we've seen other examples. Maldives in the recent past has been one of them, that we've been helping out in all sorts of security preparations. Then one fine day, they decide to ask us to leave in rather unceremoniously. So these things can happen. What is a practical role that India can play in its own security interests in this region?
Look, I think the Prime Minister is going to play precisely that role of trying to bring about an amicable resolution. And the Foreign Secretary, you remember, has stressed the word mutually acceptable. So these are a very, very careful choice of words. May I say very honestly that yes, I fully with Captain Bansal, the Indian Ocean, in fact, all oceans across the world should be zones of peace. But very respectfully, I want to say that from my limited research, it's very unlikely the PLA, for example, which has got nuclear submarines, various vessels moving up and down what is now the Indo-Pacific. It's not the Indian Ocean anymore, it's the Indo-Pacific. The Chinese hate that word. They still call it Asia Pacific. So they're all over the place. And I'm not very sure that they're going to listen to any argument, although it's a very, very good argument that let's make it a zone of peace. As far as as far as Chinese are concerned, well, Hong Kong today, long before the expiry of its 50-year lease, I mean, that lease was torn up by General Secretary Xi Jinping. Today, Hong Kong is no different from Shanghai or Suzhou or any other Chinese city. Is absolutely the same. So if we are now in a situation where, for example, the Panama Canal has gone back from Chinese control to American control, the Suez Canal, fortunately, is under Egyptian control, and the Egyptians are very, very wise in following a middle path, and they don't take sides. So there is no problem frankly, for the US or for any other country,
Okay.
as correctly been said. But I would only like to say that as far as the Diego Garcia is concerned, I can't see any future US government until there is a kind of a settlement with China, whether it comes after a kinetic conflict or hopefully much before that. Until that happens,
Okay.
and so Rishabh, let's not hold our breath until that issue is resolved. And don't forget, it's not only US, it's also other countries. And there
Yes.
are countries like India where there's been deliberate aggression from the 1950s and takeover of sovereignty.
Yes.
In fact, Western governments have not called out China in the way they have called out some other countries. I mean, for example, Russia in
Yes.
Ukraine. What about Indian sovereignty? So I'd like to say,
Okay.
Rishabh, it's a complex issue, and I think the Prime Minister is going there with a very clear knowledge of the complexity, and I think he'll try and emerge.
Okay, so like I said, we
consensus.
have in principle and then in practicality. So let me now take this from a different tack before I run out of time. Hindol, now the Indian Prime Minister is going to Mauritius. Mauritian leadership has travelled to India many a time. We have not only had historical roots, but we in a modern era built a solid association with Mauritius. 10 years ago, you would have asked me, Mauritius was just a sore thumb for all sorts of illicit money laundering activities. Now it's completely changed in the perception of our relationship. But my straightforward question is, does it matter what India feels about the Chagos Islands? Do we have a say in the process?
We will have a say as days go by in the future. Let me also say that, and something that hasn't been mentioned in this program yet, remember Diego Garcia is also rumored, and I use my words carefully, rumored to be infamous CIA black site. There has been a lot of conversation about what planes land there, whether prisoners are actually landed and housed there, for how long, do they only remain in the aircraft and then the aircraft moves on. All of this has been debated, deliberated upon. No one, of course, knows 100% the truth, but this has for long been rumored to be one of the most important black sites of the CIA. So this is not going out of American hands anytime soon. I do agree with the other panelists that India's role should advance. Could advance, indeed should advance, and I think Prime Minister Modi is best placed to take this conversation forward. It really should be an area of influence which India, in a sense, maintains, and keeps away from the Chinese. Let's be absolutely honest. And also, this idea that it will remain, the Chinese will respect any zone of peace. I'm also very skeptical. The Chinese respect nothing but what works for them. And in any loophole, any window that they see, they will exploit, especially in the Indian Ocean. So this is a tricky one, but I think Prime Minister Modi, on India's part, is absolutely correct in re-emphasizing again and again the value and the importance of sovereignty.
Okay, so in principle, we have consensus in principle. So now, like I said, only the matter of practice is left. I'll leave the last word with Captain Bansal. Captain Bansal, let me then address the larger picture question, right? What is an equitable way that another great power can have military bases in other parts of the world? The Americans have it from Okinawa to Germany, 750 of these bases. Let's be honest, we also want more. We are not satisfied with the one official one that we've got on the eastern seaboard of Africa in Djibouti. So we want more. The Chinese for sure want more. They want them in Burma, they want them in the Maldives, in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka. They're trying everywhere. So what's an equitable way of doing it?
See, I think it should be with the consent of the host government and by paying a token fee or whatever the host government stipulates. But more significantly, I think it is in our interest at this point of time that external powers do not have bases in Indian Ocean region. That is my belief, because this Indo-Pacific construct, I don't buy it, because there are different understanding for different powers. The Americans consider Indo-Pacific only till India. They don't really look at east coast of Africa or the Arabian Sea as part of Indo-Pacific. So American construct as far as Indo-Pacific is quite different. What others look at Indo-Pacific is quite different. Indo-Pacific does not really serve us. It is in our interest to make Indian Ocean as India's ocean.
Okay.
That should be our immediate aim, and for that we should look for bases in this particular region and ask other countries to slowly extricate themselves from here.
Okay.
I agree that US is not going to pull out tomorrow, but eventually they will have to. The economic costs will dictate so, the changing geopolitics will dictate so, and we'll have to fill in the void.
Yeah, will the Americans will have to start reviewing the cost of their overseas bases? I'm sure. Will it be Diego Garcia number one on the chopping block? Probably not. Is an in principle, in practice conversation. Now, of course, Prime Minister Modi's visit to Mauritius is about a whole lot of other things. He's going to be the chief guest on the National Day. There's a lot more to the Indian-Mauritian relationship, not just Diego Garcia and the Chagos Islands. But the reason we have spent some time discussing them is because of the conundrum it presents. The consensus you have that yes, what India's opinion is on the matter does actually affect the outcome. In principle, it should be returned to the Mauritians. Everything else should be in consultancy over their sovereign territory in what they think is an equitable solution. Thank you to my guests. See you in a minute.